Good evening. My name is Todd Lefkow, and I'm chair of East-West Connections. Welcome to the discussion of Chekhov's The Seagull. This is also a memorial to Yury Butusov, the brilliant director of The Seagull and other theater, who tragically died while on vacation in Bulgaria. There has been a go-to fund established for his family. Information on how to support the fund will be distributed on our website and will be sent to all registrants in the next few days and on our social media platforms. I wish to thank our co-sponsors, the Museum of Russian Art, the Macalester College Russian Studies Department in Zerkalo, the Russian media. I also appreciate your understanding of the now corrected difficulty with access to the film. This has been fixed, obviously, and access which has generously been extended for 2 additional days until through this weekend by our friend Eddie Aronoff and Stage Russia in Moscow. As always, our thanks to go to Paula Garcia and Sophia Shamal, our co-producers, and our brilliant marketing director, Catherine Galligan. We are once again honored to have the eminent academician, Dr. Marc Robinson, who will introduce our panelists. Remember to use the chat function, for questions, which Marc will remind you of, which will be discussed at the end of the session. Marc, take it away.
Thank you. I'm Marc Robinson. I'm Professor Emeritus of Russian from St. Olaf College. And tonight I will be joined by Dr. Julia Chadaga from Macalester, who is in the Russian department there, and by Ash Willison, who is a theater practitioner in Berlin, specializing in devised theater. So I'll give a little background first on Butusov, the director who staged this incredible production, as well as the person we're honoring tonight. He was born in 1961 in Gatchina, outside of Leningrad, and grew up there, not in an artistic family. Generally, or quite often in Russia, there's seems to be a legacy effect of people who work in the arts, that their children also work in the arts. And that was not the case for Butuzov. He uh, grew up, he did start studying music, learning the accordion and guitar, but then considered himself not to be of the correct temperament to excel in either one of those. And so he stopped that. When he came of age, he was not gravitating toward theater at all. He went to the um, Leningrad Institute of Shipbuilding, actually, and wanted to be an engineer building ships because he thought it was very interesting and it was very beautiful. So he did that for a while. He also tried becoming a horseback rider and a jockey, and did a number of things before he ended up going to the St. Petersburg Theatrical Academy. Uh, he started there very late and only graduated when he was 35 years old, and went through with some very famous actors such as Konstantin Habinsky, Mikhail um, Parechenkov, and others who figure into a lot of his productions later. His works from his third or fourth year in the academy started drawing a lot of attention right away, um, especially with his staging of Gogol's uh, Marriage, and also of Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground. And then his graduation work was Waiting for Godot with some of his classmates. And it became kind of the hit of the season in Leningrad, and was picked up and restaged 2 years later in 1997 at the Ленсовет Theater, which was a theater that later Butuzov himself became the artistic director of for many years. Um, his he started working primarily in uh, Leningrad, St. Petersburg, and then gradually was moved over and worked quite a bit in Moscow. So he staged in 2005 a Hamlet at the Moscow Art Theater, which was quite controversial, as many of Butusov's works tend to be. But it also proved to be very popular and was something, as you experienced watching this play, I'm sure it was something that was completely unexpected for the text that people felt very kind of comfortable with and felt like they knew. And so he developed a reputation for uh, reimagining classical works in a lot of ways. His training was heavily influenced by Brecht, and that's what his kind of uh, diploma work was on. And then he did Beckett's work, Waiting for Godot. Uh, you'll notice a lot of Brechtian influences throughout his productions. Um, and he has done a number of Brecht works himself. He staged a couple at the Pushkin Theater in Moscow, a tremendous good person of Szechuan, and then also um, Drums in the Night and many others. And he staged uh, plays all over Moscow and many places in Petersburg. He left Russia in 22 and started out trying to work in France. Did not find that very conducive to working. And from there, he moved more toward Lithuania, where he's staged a number of plays. Um, Unfortunately, he died tragically this summer uh, at the age of 63 in August when he drowned in Bulgaria when his family was on vacation. And so he leaves a wife and two children. And again, you will be receiving information regarding that from East-West Connections. So um, I will talk a little bit more about uh, this production later, but right now I'd like to pass over to Julia to give us a little more information about Chekhov and the Seagull.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark, and thanks to Todd and East-West Connections for the opportunity to take part in this discussion. So I am going to screen share in a minute. Oops. All right. Okay, here we go. Let me just start. Okay, perfect. So, yes, so The Seagull is a play about making and experiencing art. It starts with a play within a play, and two of the main characters are writers. So I'm interested in how Chekhov depicts the relationship between life and art in ethical terms. And I hope our conversation today will touch upon what Butusov does with Chekhov's treatment of art and ethics. And I'll talk a little bit about Butusov's production, but I also have lots of questions from Mark and Ash, who are experts in Butusov. So three things to know about Chekhov. One, he's a fixture of the world stage today, up there with Shakespeare. Two, he grew up in poverty, and in 1889, he wrote to a friend about his journey toward personal freedom. I'm only going to cite the last part of this quote in bold. He says, write about how this young man squeezes the slave out of himself drop by drop, and how on waking up one fine morning, he finds that the blood coursing through his veins is no longer the blood of a slave, but that of a real human being. And I think the Seagull is very much about freedom and trying to attain it and how elusive it is. So three, Chekhov was a medical doctor with literature as his mistress, as he put it. And in both professions, Chekhov learned to train his attention on details others might overlook in order to find a path toward healing. And I'll be talking about how Chekhov used details, and it'd be great. We can also then talk about what Butusov does with those details. So very brief summary of The Seagull and who is who in it. The play, set at a lakeside country estate, depicts the relationships between the aging actress Arkadina, her lover, the popular writer Trigorin, Arkadina's son Konstantin, an aspiring writer, and the young would-be actress Nina, whom Konstantin loves and who falls for Trigorin. Arkadina ridicules Konstantin's new play. Konstantin brings Nina a seagull that he has shot. Nina runs off with Trigorin to join the theater world. 2 years later, Trigorin has abandoned Nina and returned to Arkadina. After Nina visits Konstantin, he destroys his manuscript and shoots himself, while his mother and other guests at the estate are playing cards in another room. And so the play premieres at Alexandrinsky Theater in St. Petersburg in October 1898. And then, I'm gonna move this. So in this image from the journal, the satirical journal Fragments, Askolki, there's the cartoonist is depicting the critics as hunters wielding rifles, evoking the one used by Konstantin, and they're all taking shots at Chekhov. So, and I provide a couple quotes from critics of the time, the first one talks about the audience's reaction to the play. The seagull perished. It was killed by the unanimous hissing of the public. It was as if millions of bees, wasps, and hornets filled the air of the auditorium. That is how strong and venomous the hissing was. So this quote likens the audience members to insects, as if taking the cue from the human-animal juxtapositions in the Seagull, from Konstantin's play with its opening lines, people, lions, eagles, quails, to Nina's identification with the seagull when she says to Konstantin, "This lake attracts me as if I were a seagull." Second quote, the viewer yearns to find out what will happen next, but the characters keep playing cards. And then, after playing a bit longer, they just as suddenly go to another room to drink tea. So this critic is objecting to what was groundbreaking about Chekhov's play. The conventionally important actions, like, for example, the suicide attempts, and when Konstantin challenges Trigorin to a duel, those take place off stage. And on stage, we see this humdrum actions in dialogue that are, in fact, the main things. Chekhov shifts our understanding of what is actually important. Oh. Trying to advance sorry. Here we go. Okay. Advance my slide. So from failure to success. So Chekhov's The Seagull failed when it debuted in St. Petersburg. But 2 years later, it was a triumphant success when it staged in Moscow. So I think this is an inspiring lesson for all of us, not to give up on things that mean the most to us. Chekhov wrote about the task of the writer as follows. He said, the job of a writer is not to solve problems, but in fact, the artist does not have to be the judge of his characters and of what they say. His only task is to be a dispassionate witness. So I think this is very important, right? An artist just has to ask the right questions. And literature bears witness, right? Raises key questions. And The Seagull asks, what does success look like? How can we define a good life? For Arkadina, success is winning the adulation of others. By her definition, she has found success, but she tramples on the emotions of her son. And Chekhov's play asks us if such unethical behavior can be part of a life well lived. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about playing roles on stage and in life. The Seagull asks us to think about the roles that we all play, whether or not we're actors. We perform different selves with different people, and when we are on stage versus backstage. And here I'm referring to the classic work by Erving Goffman, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. So Nina wants to decide what role to play rather than have to play the role someone else assigns to her. The seagull, as living bird, corpse, and stuffed effigy, is a key to understanding this issue of roles we choose or are made to perform. So Trigorin tells Nina he has an idea for a short story. A young girl like you grows up on the shores of a lake. She loves the lake as a seagull does and is happy and free as a seagull. But a man happened to come by, saw her, and having nothing better to do, he destroyed, Pogubil literally killed her, just like the seagull here. So in Act 4, Nina keeps repeating that she's a seagull, but the lack of articles in the Russian language make her statement, "Ya chaika," ambiguous. So it's like, I am seagull. I am a seagull, free to soar above the degradation of the world and the demeaning roles foisted on economically vulnerable women, versus I am the seagull, the one that Konstantin shot, or the one in Trigorin's allegory, thus buying into this cliche of fallen woman who has perished after being seduced. But Nina's speech in Act 4 oscillates between accepting and rejecting that label. I am the seagull. No, that's wrong, she keeps saying. Another thing I want to point out is Chekhov uses speaking names, a device going back to 18th century comedies, and such names evoke a character's essence that determines their actions. So consider Arkadina's brother Soren, an unusual name that invokes the noun sor, trash, or the verb sarit, to litter. And indeed, Soren litters his language with verbal trash, ending sentences with the phrase, and all that, if so, and sees himself as a kind of a cast-off. But remember, Chekhov wants us to think twice before trashing things and people. So a little bit about the Seagull's sources. A forerunner to the Seagull is Chekhov's novel, his only first full-length novel, The Shooting Party, from 1884, in which a male writer views the young girl he murdered as an artistic medium that he can manipulate at will. Trigorin is more subtle. He tells Nina that she can feed his writing. Quote, the young girls in my books are seldom living characters. I would like to look out at the world through your eyes to find out what sort of little thing, shtuchka, you are. So he's also kind of predatory in his approach to her. And Butusov's staging highlights the notion of Nina as an artist's material, when two characters manipulate Nina's hair, turning it into a work of art. So a little bit more about the sources. Trigorin gives a preview of how he will use and abandon Nina, framing it as an idea for a short story, as if he could not help but play the role in the plot that is already written. The seagull's transformation into a stuffed effigy evokes the idea of the artist taking life and turning it into an object for display. Chekhov may be doing some self-reflection in depicting Trigorin as an artist who poaches from life, given that Chekhov took episodes from his friends' lives and put them on stage. Another major source for the Seagull is Hamlet. Already in Act 1, a play within a play appears, and Constantine and Arkadina quote Hamlet to one another. These allusions bring in a rich array of associations. I can say more about that during our discussion, but I'll save time now. And Constantine sees his long and stilted description of a moonlit night as inferior to that of Trigorin, who writes, quote, that the neck of a broken bottle lying on the bank glittered in the moonlight. This imagery earlier appeared in Chekhov's 1886 letter to his brother Alexander and his short story, The Wolf. So nice, he used it thrice. Here's his letter. I'm just going to read the shorter version. Descriptions of nature should be very short and to the point. Commonplaces such as the setting sun bathing in the waves of the darkening sea, poured out a flood of crimson gold, etc., should be eliminated. Focus on minute details. You can produce the impression of a moonlit night, for example, by writing that the broken bottle glass twinkled like stars. Chekhov shows us a littered landscape and transforms trash into treasure. As in his art more broadly, he challenges received ideas of what deserves our attention. And now a little bit about Butusov's staging. This is my last slide. So I'm curious, how does Butusov spotlight what made Chekhov's play innovative? Butusov underscores the artifice of theater to heighten our consciousness of the roles we play in everyday life. Butusov cranks Chekhov's repetition up to 11. Having multiple actors play the same character when he repeats a scene over and over underscores the role-playing and the artifice. Next question, I think for Ash in particular, given your focus on physical expressions in theater, in Butusov's staging is the dancing, so much dancing. Is it a form of personal expression or a puppet-like obedience to a force from outside that takes over the body? Then the role of makeup. I'm thinking especially of the Constantine's blood-covered face in the scene where his mother washes his face while he's in the bathtub. Amazing scene. What's happening with the makeup? Where are the comic moments in the staging and what is their effect? Then the rope swings on stage were particularly striking for me, and I saw a review that spoke of them as evoking both the childhood joy of flight and a gallows. Very ambiguous symbol, but I noticed that the joy of flight, making us think again about the seagull and all of its, what it symbolizes. So then through his practice of what he calls nonlinear theater, Butusov seems to be playing with the audience's expectations about theater and narrative, as Chekhov did. Konstantin makes a speech about theater needing new forms, and I'm curious about whether for Butusov, his own quest for new forms was purely formal or aimed for social impact too. So I've taken the cue from Chekhov to leave us with many questions that I hope we'll address today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was great. Super lead into this production. A little bit about this production. I was able to see it during the premiere season. And I don't think I saw the actual first production, but at one of the second or third premieres that year. And it was a full house, of course, at the Satyricon. And the play I watched lasted about 4 hours and 45 minutes. So we got off a little easy with this taping. But one thing that happened during it was there was a number of people who left the theater quite vocally, saying what they disliked about this production, that it wasn't Chekhov and everything else, and they left. And they left probably within the first act or two. And everybody who stayed, which was the vast majority of the um, audience, ended up giving the show 8 standing ovations afterwards. And um, and that reception seemed to be the one that won out overall, because the play then ended up receiving the Golden Mask and winning many awards throughout its lengthy time in the repertoire, and it's still technically in the repertoire of the Satyricon Theater. And so that's 13 years, which is a pretty good run for a play, even though Butusov, of course, has been gone since 22. But it's still listed as being in the repertoire. One thing I find very fascinating about the show is something that I'm reminded of with your quote about Hamlet, your allusions to the Hamlet references. Butusov actually staged Hamlet twice, once at the Moscow Art Theater and once at the Len Soviet Theater, and possibly even more times than that, but those are the two that I saw and I know about. But I had a friend who, Dr. Donna Freeman, who once said to me that somebody had told her that if it's okay when you're directing Shakespeare, don't worry about it. Just do what you want to, because you're not going to hurt his reputation. And I think that that's very interesting, especially about Chekhov in Russia, that his reputation is not going to be hurt no matter what people kind of do to it. People may not like it, but it's not going to affect people's evaluation of who Chekhov is as a writer and the importance of his works, which is a lot of freedom. And when he's talking, one of the additional pieces of video material that is available on the Stage Russia site is a talk between Butusov and Smilyansky, who's one of the leaders of the Moscow Art Theater School and works also in Boston. And so he's talking about it. And I think it is in that one or another place that he was mentioning that he was very concerned about doing Gogol's Revizor. And as a friend of mine once said, Revizor is the Inspector General is a holy thing, and so you need to treat it with respect. And he was, Butusov was very worried about doing anything to the Inspector General. And then, since Meyerhold had been shot by the Soviet regime, his papers and notes were not released until much, much later. And in fact, uh, just about 10 or 15 years ago were they really available. And so then Butusov went back to review them and noticed that even Meyerhold himself had cut out lines and switched places and moved text around. And he said, okay, I can do what I want. And gave him the freedom to explore and to put his stamp on this work of art. Um, so with that, I don't want to give any more about my own thoughts right now about the production. I'd like to open it up to Ash because Ash went with me in 2016. I took a group of students along with Gary Gisselman um, to do an interim course, a January term course on theater in Russia, in which we saw, I think, 22 plays in 25 days. And one of those was uh, The Seagull. And Ash knew no Russian going there and had to get the brief synopsis of what was going on in the play The Seagull. Maybe she had read The Seagull, but then was thrown in to see this production without any subtitles. So, Ash, would you like to talk about your response to seeing that or his flight at the Vakhtangov Theater?
Yeah, sure. It's so special to be here. I'm really honored to be here. So thanks for everyone that made this possible. Yeah, as Mark said, I saw Chaika, and at that point, we kind of developed a mode of viewing theater without understanding Russian at all, between me and some of the other students that were there. So it usually in shows that we were watching, there would be like the first 30 minutes of like whispering, oh, that's that person and that's that character. And so you could track who it is. And I think remembering the experience of this show, I remember not needing this a lot of the time. And when it started, it was very present. The show filled so much more than the stage. It really captured every part of you, and how awesome that was to see a story unfold that seemed to transcend language a little bit, and how cool that was for me. And at the time, I was really dazzled by devised theater, physical theater. I was like researching it a lot in my private time, and I was writing and developing an independent major based on physical theater. But I didn't have this kind of these kind of productions where I was going to school. So it was really quite special to be there and see that. And that's what I'm doing now, physical and devised theater. And when I heard of Butusov's passing, it was really tragic. I didn't know that it happened until Mark informed me. And I've used Chaika and Flight, this other show that he did at the Vakhtangov, constantly as shows to go back to. Sometimes you just need to go back to something and refresh your vigor for making devised theater. Because so often we're in processes as a devised theater maker, we're in processes where you get stuck very easily because working with people is hard. I think we all can relate to that. And working on new stories is hard. And working on new forms of old stories is really hard. And I think when I rewatched the show today / yesterday, this stood out to me. Was Konstantin's moment to talk about forms, and we need new forms, and then how he kind of goes back on that at the end of Act 4. It's like, no, it's not really about forms. If what you're saying in the beginning is good, it's going to stay good. So it was very joyful to return to the show and understand what they were saying finally, and see how the physicality only amplified a lot of what they were saying already. Yeah, that's kind of where my head is at the moment, is thinking about the language. But I can return to some of the main takeaways that I had from that production, if now was the right time, or okay.
Yeah, we can all
um
jump in when we have something to say too.
yeah, I was trying to remember what was the most exciting pieces of the show when I first saw it. Without understanding the language, I would say the sound is something that stays with me. The music of the show and how loud it was, so impossibly loud. And I remember in a talk we had with Butusov, someone asked, "Why do you play the music so loud?" And he said, "Because I like loud music." And that was the end of the answer. And that stayed with me. I'm like, if you like loud music, you just do it. You know, you just have the platform for it. You have a little bit of control there. You can just stick with the decisions that you enjoy and don't necessarily overanalyze some of the decisions you make as a theater maker. And returning to Mark, you commented earlier on the length of the show and how long it was. And this show was just under 4 hours. The other one, Flight, was about 7 hours, maybe a little longer.
Just felt that way. It was 4.5 or 5. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
It felt so long. And as a theater maker, I was so like, oh, it's fine. If a story needs time and it needs space, and you have people and sound and things that can carry the show for that long, why not? You know, why not do that? I recently reread Peter Brook's Empty Space, and he talks about in his chapter on the rough theater about this idea of a happening and how we can separate a show from a happening. And when you're in any experience, when you're on a flight, you know, if you're in a show, if you're on a flight, if you're watching a movie, if you're stuck, stranded in the airport for some time with people, these are like the happenings. And I think having a show that long, you enter with a sense of anonymity, and you exit and you kind of feel that you've all been through something intense together. Which it's just very cool to think about that meta framework when you're designing shows. How do we make it travel beyond just the moment and the story?
That's a very interesting point because um, when you're watching these plays, you are with a full auditorium of everybody who's experiencing the same thing at the same time, etc. And here we have the screening of this wild, physical, present production, but we're all kind of isolated when we're watching it. These panels are nice because it gives us all a chance to gather and reflect on the same experience we had, though separately. And we don't get a lot of opportunity to do that. And that's one of my favorite things about these panels, is a chance to come together and talk about what we've experienced. I know a lot of Russian theater makers did not want any of their shows filmed because they felt that it was a live uh, art form, and they did not want it filmed. Actually,
Mm.
Dmitry Krymov was one of those who was very adamant about that, and I am so thankful that he's rethought that some and has allowed many of his a few of his wonderful works to be filmed and uh, distributed by Stage Russia and others. And but this production, as well as Flight and pretty much any of the ones I've seen of Butuzov's, are almost visceral in the
Mm.
physicality, not only of the actors and the stage space, but the connection between the audience and what's going on. And that was even evident with those people who uh, left vocally and said, "This is not Chekhov. This is not what I bought my ticket to see." That still means that they are physically engaged with this. They may not like it, but they were very definitely participating in it in a visceral way. Um,
Yeah, I'd say it's one of the most exciting aspects of theater for me and what continually draws me back to making it. Um, in Chaika, it's such a it's all the senses are engaged. It's so you even see it, and they did such a good job capturing it on film actually for this. I thought you can really see like it's slimy in parts, it's loud, it has this like performance art quality to it. I'm always a fan of like making a very big mess, and he really does that to the max. Like when he's throwing this mic stand over his shoulder without looking where it's going, even though it's like, yes.
yeah, and the tipping over of the table, and it's just everywhere you look, there's some detail, like you were talking about, Julia, those specific details. They're everywhere. They're in the sound, they're in the set, and they're not, the interesting thing is that they're not so um, unilateral in their meaning, that by their kind of specificity, they end up becoming more general. And it's a very interesting aspect of the work, I think, that you see the baby dolls
Mm.
scattered throughout this production. And I remember when we saw it, somebody actually said, "Why are all those babies up there on the?" They were on the side of the makeup room thing, which a lot of people couldn't see, wasn't really focused on in the filming, but it was able to be seen in the theater. And then when there's two or three babies there on the rug or carpet or whatever in the final scene, after Masha and his kind of and Medvedinka are trapped together, and those little images end up having huge, almost not even more metaphorical than allegorical meanings. And the wooden structures that the set hangs on, sometimes they're crosses, sometimes there's something else. As you mentioned, the ropes are a tremendous symbol of this freedom. We have Kostya trying to fly, hanging himself in it, but he's kind of also bound up in it, and it's very reminiscent of the ropes around his face. And um, and it leaves a lot of questions for the audience member to stick their own foot in or their hand in and just say, okay, what's my take? What am I getting from this production? It's not served on a platter. The platter might be there, but it's going to be dumped and flow all over uh, the stage. So you have to reimagine what that means for you as you're watching it. What are your thoughts, Julia, on some of these questions that you had asked?
Wait, my thoughts. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm seeing there's a question. We got like a chat,
Okay.
something in the chat, and then there's
Good.
something in the Q&A. So maybe we can.
How
Oh,
is
I
the
see.
Seagull
That was
relevant
just
today?
a recording. But then like, how is Seagull relevant today? That's from Todd.
Uh-huh.
Maybe we can speak to that one?
Sure. Um, I've one of the things I find really relevant about it is that he sets it outside of time and he does this with many of his works, that the costuming, the sound, everything is not narrowly defined by a representation of the time when the play was written. Um, and this was evident in the Inspector General. It's evident in this one. In Flight, it was evident. There are things that are outside of time, and so the themes and the ideas that are being presented and demonstrated in front of you, it seems to me, are offered as a way to connect with the text for today, which gets to that question of the seagull and ethics, and of how do we make it fit into our own uh, understanding of the world as it is, and this idea of new forms and cliches, which is one of the big kind of themes of the show as well. Um, is very interesting how it's presented in a way that makes you not just be presented with it, but it's kind of lived for you in the process while you're going on there. We're seeing new forms. This is a method of performing the seagull that hasn't happened before, and it's and it uses so many theatrical tricks throughout it that are uh, have a risk of becoming a gimmick or a cliche in the same way of the writing cliches, but here they feel very new. And I think this is really evident in the uh, repetition of scenes. At the end of, I think it's Act 3, where Trigorn and Nina talk about his idea for the story, and it's different people, different actors come out and deliver the same scene over and over and over. Um, this is kind of a traditional Stanislavskian technique of kind of called an etude, of working on a scene and doing it in a different way until you get where it feels really true. And in Act 4, where they're giving Kostya's speech, starting with Butusov, and then other people, 4 or 5 people, giving the speech in completely different ways. And I remember watching that and thinking, oh my God, another one. There's another one. There's another one. And yet, at the end of them, I felt like I knew those and understood those scenes and those speeches on such a deeper level than I did coming in to see this. And it wasn't one level, it was many different levels. And so I think these questions of cliche and how are we going to be authentic and where do we, you know, create our own personhood of our own identity? Is it going to be in the art we create or who we are as people? Most of these people are not terrific people. I mean, Arkadina is not a great person. Trigorn is not a great person, you know. Um, and they've kind of settled into who they are, but it gives us an opportunity to look at that and to evaluate it and uh, overlay the play with our own questions about ethics and meaning.
Yeah. Just to build on what you're saying, Mark, too, I was thinking about how this play spoke to me and how Butusov's production really heightened those things that seemed like very relevant to the times we live in. And just to go back to this idea of what is success, what does it mean to be successful? What does it mean to have a good life? And, Arkadina says at the end in Act 4, oh, look, they loved me in Kharkov. I went to Kharkov and the audience just adored me and they celebrated me. Though that for her success is this popularity. And it's, you know, and so we think about people playing roles, putting on personas, and doing it for this adoring public. That is magnified now in the times we live in with social media, and so for it becomes like this way of people considering what their value is through how much they're followed or liked, and they are also performing these kinds of roles. And so it's very like Chekhov kind of predicted all of this. It's or rather what he says is something that applies to every time period, and it lands, I think, differently in different times. But for me, this was kind of very powerful. And I think with Butusov repeating certain scenes over and over, it's like this effect of defamiliarization. Like after a while, you know, if you say something over and over, it starts to seem strange, and then you see it in a new way from a new perspective. And I think Chekhov does tries to get us to see that, and I think Butusov helps that through that defamiliarization. Well, like with Brecht, as you were talking about, it's kind of a Brechtian device too. I see two more questions that we got. Do you see them
Sure.
or? Yeah.
Yeah, the ones, there's nothing in chat, right?
Oh, okay. It's in Q&A.
Right, yeah, so I've got those up here.
Yeah.
So one is by, first of all, just an interesting observation by Eddie Aronov, who runs Stage Russia, who has gratefully, thankfully provided these for us to watch and to discuss in supporting this. He said that a restaging of this production, directed by Konstantin Raikin, who is the head of the Satyricon Theater where this is showing, or is in repertoire, with the blessing of Yury's wife Masha, is being presented in Yerevan this weekend. And it will be added to the Satyricon repertoire this winter to continue being shown. So that's very good, interesting news. And then a question from Natalia Krylova. She talks about how fun and how playful much of this production is, and illusions. And then she says there's an element that completely stumps her, the dog. From the backdrop with a Dadaist image of a dog chasing a man, to a character pretending to be a dog in Act 1, to all the barking and howling throughout. What's going on there? And what does the recurring canine motif mean in your interpretation, or interpretations, let's say? Thank you for your insights. Would anybody like to?
That's a great
Weigh in on
question.
this?
Yeah.
I thought about this quite a bit when I was watching it again about this dog, and I
Mhm.
don't have a very clear like answer for me, but something that I did feel throughout the show, I agree with this. It's very, very playful. That's also what I would say that why it's still relevant to today, that it's returning to like the playfulness of being super generous with how many versions we get to see of the show. Um, but the dog specifically, to me, it was like this primal presence that sometimes, like in some of the when the characters split into two bodies, sometimes it's present there. Like when Arkadina suddenly becomes a lot more primal in her. She's when I don't remember when she's talking to Konstantin, I think, and changing his bandages and whatnot. And then the dog to me was this constant presence and symbol of the thing that's right there. It could break loose at any moment. In a way.
And it's kind of something that harbors, if not malice, at least something we're afraid of or that bothers us. And in the text, of course, he does mention the dog. Um, uh, Shemarayev, I think, mentions the dog early on and how he can't sleep because it's always howling and it's barking all the time, and they want him to get it to shut up and stuff. Um, and so from the beginning, and it's very interesting, and it's this, whereas throughout the whole rest of the play, everybody else all the characters are played by multiple people. For Shemarayev and Medvednica, they're both played by the same person. And so it's kind of an inversion of that, and he ends up playing the dog as well. And so again, it's a kind of a theatrical trick or gimmick that is used specifically, I think, to bring up these primal elements, this fear, this sense of foreboding almost that's going to last throughout the whole play in different ways. Um, yeah, Julie, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It's a great question. Well, I was thinking about how, in Chekhov, the dog is always off stage. Like there's a first dog reference is actually to this Trezor, which is the dog that lives in Nina's home. And she says, oh, like Konstantin wants to follow her home or stand outside her window. She says, no, 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 Trezor is going to bark. And then and it's all completely just it's off stage. But Butusov brings that Trezor right on stage, and the Trezor is like very aggressive. So that's very interesting, right? That's where the things that are off stage in Chekhov are just like bursting forward, like you both were saying. Like there's this kind of aggression that's actually like right there on the stage. Um, and then yeah, the again like the discussion of the dog that's keeping Arkadina awake, that they need to tie up or untie. But there's also like I feel like there's some relationship to the seagull that is this overdetermined like symbol of like Nina, or maybe it's not Nina or some, right? We keep there's seagulls being thrust at us as supposedly a symbol of Nina, and she kind of in some ways accepts it but also rejects it.
Mhm.
And that sort of human animal parallel is very strong in the play, and then somehow the dog being played by a human seems to be an interesting counterpart to this seagull that is representing a person, so I feel like there might be something there as well, like it's almost kind of heightening this human animal connection. Also, like one thing that gets repeated in Butusov a lot is that opening to Konstantin's play, like Luzi, Arli, wait, what, it's like people, eagles, quails. It's very funny in the
Robins,
Russian.
yeah.
It's hilarious,
Yeah.
right? And it gets repeated a bunch of times. So it always makes me think, okay, this is important to Butusov. Why is he repeating it over and over? And it's again that kind of unstable boundary between humans and animals, maybe that he's playing with. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. Um, John Friedman, in his review of the play when it first came out, um, stated that let me see, I've got the quote here, Butusov made it seem as though the play actually takes shape before our eyes on the stage of the Satyricon Theater, as if Chekhov's words are being written or rewritten right there on the spot. And I think there's an element of this production which feels, I mentioned earlier the etudes, that feels like a rehearsal. And Butuzov loves rehearsals.
Mm.
And he said in one of the video interviews that he would like to never have to worry about doing a production. He'd rather just stay in the rehearsal room and explore. And I think there's a lot in this production that feels like that. The repeated scenes by different people. The person playing the animal, that's again a very traditional theater kind of exercise. Um, Everybody be a chicken, or be a dog or whatever, and do it. And he ends up using that in a number of his plays in some sense. Um, Each one of these moments, though, I think is also really important. I was reading some of the personal reviews of people who came to see this, and a lot of those were filled with just actual gems and the double entendres on purpose. One person talked about so many particular moments throughout this play that felt like these gems or diamonds that are strung along uh, like a necklace, beads on a necklace. And there's so many that it makes this beautiful necklace work of art. and then the necklace was tied into what a person's life is like, and how each one of these various moments can add up to create something of beauty. And then um, another person tied that into the fact at the end of the play, this new character, this might get to your question about the dancing, Julia, of the dancing woman who is added to uh, the show, ends the play by crying diamonds into a basin. And so, again, these gems of where do these points of our lives that end up having beauty, where do they come from and where do we find them? I think these questions are asked a lot by Chekhov. And that was part of the issue of why people didn't understand him, because he found them in everyday occurrences, not in the big moments that you think they're going to be. And it's, again, it's very interesting to me that Butusov chooses to uh, have so many gunshots in this in this play and right on stage. Whereas the whole thing about Chekhov, everybody knows, is that if there's a gun, you got to use it, but you better use it off stage because we don't want that to be the real action. We want the real action somewhere else. And uh, you know, in the play as written, Kostya kills himself off stage, but there are so many acts of violence that take place in a grotesque, carnivalesque way throughout this production that, again, helps us to reframe this and re-see it with new eyes, kind of, over the course of the production.
I have a question, I guess for both Ash and Mark, just in terms of what you think. One thing I noticed with the Butusov production is the use of voice and intonation. So, um, yeah, and I was thinking, Mark, what you said about how people marched out of the play and said, "This is not Chekhov." And one of the things was I noticed in the Butusov staging is characters would deliver most of their lines by screaming them and then drop their voice down to a normal delivery of the rest of the line. I think the Masha character did that in particular. Or Trigorin, there's a scene, Trigorin is yelling, and then Nina says, "I think you're overworked," in this kind of very neutral way. And it's like this switched to me. I saw it as from this Dostoevskian like nadriv. I don't know how to translate that, but this Dostoevskian like strain, where you're just like sort of cry, kind of like cry talking, screaming, right? To this, I guess, more familiar Chekhovian intonation that sort of shocks us into laughter. And I think it's one of the places I think that where Butusov found the comic effects or created these comic effects. But I was just really curious since you know more about Butusov, just like what you made of that, the use of voice, because in Chekhov there's also discussion of voice in terms of Soren says, "I once sang the song and I was told that I have a loud voice but also an unpleasant one." So there's already this kind of emphasis on voice, but Butusov does so much more with it. So
Ash,
yeah.
you want to
Uh,
jump in first, or you want me to? Or?
Sure, I can. It was interesting watching the show again because my approach at creating work at the moment is with students and also with myself and shows I work on is like earn your shouting moments and earn your sexy moments. And then watching this show, it's like shouty, shouty, sexy, sexy, shouty, shouty, sexy. It's all there. And I was like, why did I like this show so much? But I think um the shouting, it almost like points toward, it develops its own language um of volume and then what that means. And some of the especially when they're playing the cards in the fourth act and they're really just propelling those lines out into nowhere. And to me, the effect was very much like just banging that idea home of this is a show is almost a very Brechtian, like this is a show, this is a show, juxtaposed with these gunshots of something that maybe isn't a show that's happening somewhere off stage. So the fact that he paints such like a vivid backdrop of all this noise makes those other moments like that much more tender. That was the effect that I had.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I also notice in Russian theater in general, Russian actors tend to use a much broader range of their voice than we tend to in the West. That somebody gets a character, and if they're going to get angry, then there's going to be a big build up to that anger, and then it'll peak and be done with, and then they'll be the regular character again. And even at that, there's not going to be. We sometimes do it with volume, but we very rarely do it with pitch in the US. And that's something that is very noticeable in Russian theater, that they use the full range of pitch for their voice as well as amplification and for different effects. And I think he's playing with it throughout here. And depending on who the character is, Masha is not a happy character
Mm.
ever. Um, she's always in mourning for her life. Uh, and so, but she's often presented traditionally as just kind of, especially at the beginning, just kind of moping of, I'm emo Masha kind of, that I've uh, got this horrible life, and so I'm always in mourning and feeling bad. Whereas this one is, I'm really upset about the way
Mm.
my life is going, that there's no way out for me. And we see that in the show, that there is no way out for her. She is abandoned by everybody she wanted to love. They don't care about her. And the people who love her, she doesn't care about. And she has kids she doesn't care about. And it's not a good situation. Um, I see Eddie, or Todd has joined us here. And so that means that we're drawing to a close. It's the start of the music at the end of the Academy Awards. But you have to turn off your mute button, Todd.
Okay.
There we go.
Actually, people think I sounded better muted than not. I've been sitting here thinking about the idea that Chekhov is not South Park. One of the things about theater and what makes something more eternal, why are there thousands of productions, but very few are remembered in history? And I keep thinking the idea that the good theater is a reflection of political culture, style, form, philosophical, and it faces questions that everybody needs to face and think about, but very few people do. People use theater for two functions. One is to get away from thinking, and the other is to think. And Chekhov is a thinking person who basically draws somebody either to them or repels. Because number one, they don't want to face the consequences of what the answers are, and they don't want to think about it. And secondly, because they wish to be entertained. And one of the things that strikes me about not just Chekhov, but a lot of Russian theater is that entertainment is seen in a different form that often will do, or what will be popular on television or something like that, which is one of the reasons that we exist in East-West Connections, mainly because people need to think about different questions, and the questions that Chekhov has raised are not questions that are answered by blithe answers in 10 words or less. They're discussional questions and they're relational questions. Somebody once said that the Shakespeare had three questions. What was, who are we, Why are we and what are we? And in many ways, that's Chekhov also. I wish to thank Mark and Julia and Ash. I wish especially to thank Eddie for helping us. The film will be shown, and we'll send out a note on this tomorrow, through the weekend, through the goodness of Eddie. And I hope, and hopefully you'll pay attention to the support system, the go-to fund for Butusov. I mean, the world lost the potential of what was going to come, and it's something you cannot replace. You can only tragically observe. I want to thank Museum of Russian Art, the McAllister College Russian Studies Department, and Seagull, the Russian media. I especially want to thank, our marketing director, Catherine Galligan, and Paula Garcia and Sophie Shamal, our co-producers. So for those of you, also one last point before I turn it back to Mark to make a comment. Mark, go ahead, and I'll make my pitch. Go
Okay,
ahead.
we got a notice from Eddie, and it says that they will be filming Yury Butusov's Lithuanian production of Tom Stoppard's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, this coming this February for release for
Good.
next fall. And they'll also be presenting his Vakhtangov Peer Gynt in cinemas this spring.
And if you get a chance, look up Stage Russia. Eddie has survived as an American in a unique structure. And he's done, as we say, he's not only done good, he's done goodness, which is often a different aspect. I also want to mention, and this is our shameless pitch, we are, developing for after January more of a focus on culture. And I'm trying to think through the concept of what does culture entail for the former Soviet Union? What are the questions it raises and how to best present it? Whether it's the idea of architecture or theater or music and all of those things together. If you've got suggestions, please, let us know on our website, and because it goes to me. And also, if you wish to participate in this, we ask you, one or two people make a tremendous difference. We're a volunteer organization, and we appreciate the help of everyone because everyone's extremely important. So for that, I say thank you, Godspeed, and hope you all have a good night and hope you enjoyed the program and made you think of it. Okay?
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ash. Thanks, Julia. Mark, as always. Это хорошо. Я очень рад. Я очень рад.
Мы тоже рады.
Да, тоже. Окей, пока.